The Edmonton Oilers once again pulled from behind to pull out a late victory, prevailing 5-3 over the Minnesota Wild on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, on today's episode, the big come-from-behind victory, which is starting to become a recurring pattern. The levels to this game, to quote Omar from The Wire, about there being levels and coming at the king and you best not miss. And then we'll set the tone for a back-to-back against the Avalanche tonight, a quick turnaround for the Oilers. So, to start, it's becoming a recurring pattern that the Oilers are falling behind by multiple goals to start games, other than the game against the Kings, in which they won 1-0. If you'll recall, last Thursday, the Penguins got out to a multi-goal lead. The Oilers crawled back into that game, but put themselves way too far behind to make that a plausible comeback. Same thing against the Blackhawks, but thankfully, because the Blackhawks are not the most talented team in the world, the Oilers were able to find a way to claw their way back in and ultimately win that game. And same thing tonight. The Minnesota Wild are depleted. They are an injured hockey team. They are missing some of their most important players. And we're going to talk about that more in the second segment of today's show. But it is a dangerous proposition, if you will, for a good hockey team like the Oilers. And make no mistake, the Oilers are a very good hockey team. The results over the last almost 8 weeks at this point are that of a strong Stanley Cup contender and what's a very weak NHL. And I know there are going to be people who don't watch the Oilers regularly, who look at the guys who are getting playing time, like Podkolzin, like Kasperi Kapanen, like Josh Brown, see Jeff Skinner not playing, seeing Noah Phillip get a spot start, and wondering, is this team really that good? And this is where you can kind of prove your difference, your bona fides, because as much as the slow starts are concerning, it's always going to be harder to come from behind in sports. We know, based on the way hockey in particular develops, that it's arguably the most difficult sport to manufacture from offense from behind, because the game conditions materially change, because score impacts dictate the levels of aggressiveness within hockey in a way they don't in the other sports. Sure, in basketball, if a team gets out to a big lead, they're going to milk the shot clock more, they're going to last their possessions longer, and they're going to make safer plays to try and get guaranteed buckets, as opposed to maybe pressing to try and create more explosive, trying to get more threes, more valuable scoring chances. In football, we see teams that get out to a big lead, that's when they have their full toolbox offensively, where they can run play action because the other team has to respect the run, because they can hit play action whenever they want. The running game opens up for them a lot more as well. And then the inversion of that on defense. If you have a big lead, you know the other team needs to start chucking the ball all over the place to try and move the ball more quickly than you would if you were to run the ball. And that helps you as a defense, because if you know the other team has to throw more often, that means you're going to be able to send your pass rushers to go get the quarterback and so on. Same thing in baseball. You get out to a big lead, you're okay with burning mediocre or your lower leverage relievers, because you're not going to bring your closer into a 5-run game. That's a waste. You are going to try and manufacture your way through however many outs you have left. And that's kind of the deal here in hockey. We see teams get out to these big leads, and for the most part, they are able to salt the game away. And for as shorthanded as Minnesota was tonight, I will give them a lot of credit for the first 45 minutes or so of this game, where they really did not give up a lot of room through the middle of the ice. And as we all know, That is where the Oilers make their money. What makes the Oilers so dangerous, even at 5-on-5, is their ability to go from defense to offense quickly, to get defenders in conflict where they need to make a decision, and put the goalie in conflict. And that's really fundamentally why rush offense is so valuable in hockey, because you are putting multiple layers of the other team in conflict. And when I say in conflict, it just means make them make a decision, because every system in sports, regardless of the sport, it has rules, it has principles where if something happens, there is a natural reaction within said system. It gives you a guideline to follow where if the puck goes here, I need to be here. If my partner goes there, I need to be here. Because of that, the more variability you can introduce as an attacking team, the more conflict you're going to put that other team in. For example, on the McDavid goal, the fifth goal the Oilers score, that defenseman does everything in their being to take away the pass to Zach Hyman, and they do a great job. That Minnesota defender played that as perfectly, that 2-on-1 as perfectly as possibly you could. He took away the passing lane and got McDavid to the point where all the goalie was responsible for was Connor McDavid. Now, when we see the Oilers run that play efficiently the way they would like to, Connor gets that pass around the defenseman. So the defenseman already had to commit to trying to break up the pass, which let Connor take the shot ultimately. But for argument's sake, if the defenseman doesn't play that puck perfectly, the puck gets around him and it gets to Hyman, the goalie now, he doesn't have to worry about McDavid, but he has to get over to stop Hyman. That's why that cross-seam pass is so valuable. You are putting at least two, if not more, of the other team's players in direct conflict where they need to make a decision as fast as possible, where it's not even something you're consciously thinking about. It is something you are visually reacting to. And that's really one of the traits that separates the truly great special players from just the good players from the average players, and so on. The faster you can process, and processing, it is a skill, it is a trait. I genuinely believe you can work on your processing and you can speed up your game speed. You can speed up your mental acuity in terms of game speed, because it is a refinable trait. You run drills enough, you run practice enough to get to the point that you know what you need to do instinctually, that your body, it doesn't even need to process. It becomes as habitual as breathing. It becomes as habitual as seeing. You don't have to tell your eyes, look. All you have to do is point your head. If you have glasses, if you're visually impaired, this isn't the most great, this isn't the best metaphor, but you understand what I'm saying. You don't have to consciously think about hearing if you have normal hearing. You don't have to think about taste when you're tasting. It is something you are able to do instinctually. And in those 4.5 seconds of McDavid skating full speed from blue line to the net, he already reads everything. He reads, I don't have the pass, the goalie, where am I shooting on the goalie? Okay, shoot. Like that. He doesn't have to think about it. And that's really one of those plays that shows you just how great he is. The one last thing I want to get in on this first segment before we move on, I thought the Oilers, once they got their feet under them, they did the most they could in a difficult situation. Like, even with the injuries that Minnesota has, I thought Minnesota played a really good third period. I thought Zuccarello, I thought Marco Rossi, I thought Matt Boldy, I thought those three guys were everywhere. It felt like every single time Zuccarello was on the ice, he was setting up a dangerous scoring chance. And speaking as someone who's watched pretty much the entirety of Zuccarello's NHL career, he's still the same guy. He comes to almost a complete halt. He's got such a deceptive release on his pass and his shot. So you never really know where he's going. He's one of the best head fakers in the sport, where he can be looking one direction and the puck can go in the other. And it's not a question. The puck's going to get where it needs to. And Calvin Pickard was really good tonight. He made a lot of high leverage, quality saves down the backstretch of this game when it seemed like Minnesota was right there and Minnesota might have a chance to tie it when it was still 4-3, or get back in it and make it 5-4. But we are going to take our first break of today's Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how there are levels to this here game. So be sure to stick around. Did you just realize your business needed to hire someone yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. We've all been in that spot where you need to make the right hire because your team is shorthanded. The pressure's on, and every day without that right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Thank you to everyone who was hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are making our way through. It was a fun game. And when I had done the crossover episode with Seth Topol earlier in the year, and we talked about the Oilers and the Wild and how their seasons were unfolding, the expectations, where they were at, the one recurring theme was just how much star power there is. And look, Minnesota's missing really important players. You know, Brock Faber's their best defenseman. Kirill Kaprizov is a Hart Trophy candidate. I know he's missed more than 10 games at this point, which is really going to hurt his chances of hanging around in that Hart Trophy conversation, but he's having a tremendous season. Jared Spurgeon was having a very nice return to form season after missing most of last season, but he suffered a pretty rough injury. And when you look at it in terms of the Western Conference, and we talked about it a little bit on the Pacific Division Roundtable episode of the show yesterday, which I do encourage you go check out. Chris of Locked On Golden Knights and Eddie of Locked On Kings and I, we had a really good back and forth conversation, really covered a lot of bases. And when you think about the Western Conference coming into the year, the expectation was the Oilers were going to be the best team in this division, in the West at large. They had the best odds to win the Stanley Cup coming into the season. Colorado, as a former Cup champion with high-level talent, you know, second, third best player in the world in Nathan MacKinnon, top 10 player in Cale Makar, top 10, 15 player in Mikko Rantanen. Yeah, they had goaltending issues. They have depth issues, but they're high-end guys. Though they're big three. Devon Tays in there as well. Casey Mittelstadt in there. You felt reasonably good about the Avalanche, and they've climbed well out of the dump they were in to start the season. They're only in a wild card spot right now as we sit here, but the Avalanche are a team that just gives me a little bit of pause. Of course, we'll talk about them in the next segment when we're talking about the individual game, but the Wild, the Jets, the Stars, the Kings, anyone other than Vegas, Colorado, and I would say Vancouver, but Vancouver's not in a playoff spot right now, so I don't think they necessarily are relevant for this conversation. But when we get down to brass tacks, when we are talking about the second round of the NHL playoffs, we are talking about conference finals, we are talking about cup finals, there is a baseline requisite. You know, you think about when you were enrolling in classes in college and you got to a certain point in your academic career and you wanted to take a class and it would say prerequisite, writing 205 for writing 350, you know, something along those lines. There is a certain baseline level of talent you need to have to get in the door for this type of conversation of who's going to win the conference. As we sit here on January 16th, I feel very confident in saying that the Oilers have the talent. I think the Avalanche have the high-end talent. Their depth is a little more questionable, but I can see it. I think Vegas has the high-end talent. I think that might be the end of the conversation because this game, and it's not entirely fair to the Wild, who are having a very nice season, one of their better in franchise history, who really have found a nice marriage of lasting players, guys like Zuccarello, Ryan Hartman, Joel Eriksson Ek, Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, who also didn't play tonight. to their next wave of guys, Brock Faber, Matt Boldy, Philip Gustafson, Kaprizov. They've really found a nice blend of those two iterations of the team. And I still think they don't have the requisite level of high-end talent. And even if they were healthy, I don't think Brock Faber is ready for this conversation yet. I think he very well could. I think there's a strong chance Brock Faber gets invited to represent Team USA at the Olympics next year. I think Matt Boldy has a good shot as anyone to be a consistent 35 goal guy. I think Marco Rossi, with the long path to get to where he's at now, has really carved out a nice spot for himself. But none of those guys, and even if Kaprizov's healthy, he's not McDavid. He's not Leon. He's close. I could make a strong argument Kaprizov has been a top 5 forward in the entire NHL to start this season. Earlier on Wednesday, I was putting together graphics for my awards favorites at the halfway point, and I had Kaprizov in my top 5. I have Leon as the favorite. I have Quinn Hughes. I have Connor Hellebuck. I have Nathan McKinnon. And then in my 5th spot, I did have Kirill Kaprizov, but I ultimately ended up putting McDavid in there because Kaprizov's missed too many games. Kaprizov's a great player. You compare that to where the Oilers are at, where they have 2 franchise-altering players in McDavid and Draisaitl. You still have Hyman. You still have Bouchard. You still have Ekholm. That's a really good first 5 guys. There's a reason when the Oilers are in they're in push comes to shove time. And you saw that a lot on Wednesday night down the backstretch of that game in the 3rd period where Chris Knoblauch was going with his boys. He was going out swinging. And I commend him for, even with a 1-goal lead, still loading up a first line to try and extend the lead. Ultimately, that did materialize and it worked out for him. But there are levels to this game. And we have seen that consistently in the NHL playoffs, where teams that have good regular seasons, like Winnipeg last year, like the Hurricanes consistently during the Broad Brindamore tenure. You could say like the Bruins. You could say like the New York Rangers. There are levels. The New York Rangers have consistently beat the Carolina Hurricanes in the playoffs and in the regular season. But when they get to games against the Lightning, the Panthers, you start to understand the levels to the game. I think the Oilers and the Golden Knights are the 2 best teams in the West. I think Colorado and Los Angeles are in the same tier of next wave down with Minnesota, with Winnipeg, with Dallas, where good regular season teams, all the capacity in the world to beat up on the mediocre and the bad teams. But when you lock them in a room with another team that has a big bad, has a genuinely, like Stephen A. Smith used to say about Aaron Rodgers, he's a bad man. When you get McDavid in those environments where he just needs a play, you saw it happen tonight on the 5th goal to put the game away. He put his head down and said, we are making this rush happen and we are going to come down and score. We're going to take one more break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we're going to set the table for the showdown against the Avalanche in a nationally televised game down here in the States. Be sure to stick around. If you guys know me as the host of Locked On Oilers, or I'm hosting on Locked On NHL Thursdays, you know I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories of last year was going to see Chris Stapleton and George Strait. There is nothing like a country concert football stadium in the middle of summer. It's one of the best feelings in the entire world. And now, Gametime's made it even easier for you to get tickets to your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, my friends and I were debating what we were going to do for my birthday early next month. And with Gametime, we settled on going to Devils Golden Knights so I could see Jack Eichel, one of my favorite players since he came into the league, against a pretty good Devils team. And with Gametime Picks, we found some amazing deals and we could see the view from our seats before we bought them. The super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL. for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we're making our way through the week. We're almost there. Looking forward to the weekend. NFL playoffs, divisional round. This is, for my money, my favorite weekend of the year, pretty much every year. I really like the new college football playoff layout, but being that the games were really, really mediocre that first weekend, it remains to be seen if it will approach the chaos and the fun that the divisional round consistently presents. But we're almost there, folks. We're almost there. It's Thursday. Hopefully, you're making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. You're listening to this on your way to work, on your way to school. If you're a sicko like me, you start your day at the gym or running, whichever one. If you're like me, you do both. But this show is a lot of fun to do because games like tonight, they're a reminder of what the capacity of a great team is. Because even at 2-0, and I said this last week after they lost 5-3 to the Penguins, and I'll say it again now, they're never really out of a game. And some of that is just hubris on my part of thinking, well, we got Connor, we got Leon, we'll figure it out. Can't be that bad, right? And a lot of nights, you don't want to get into that habit. It starts to become procrastinating your homework. You know, I think about how when I was in middle school and high school, when I was in middle school, I used to get home from school at like 3:00. I would sit down, I would do my homework, and then I would play 7 hours of Call of Duty, and then I would go to sleep. And then my friends started pestering me, being like, "Nah, dude, just get on when you get home. We'll do your homework later." And slowly but surely, I'd play from 3 to 10, and then I would do my homework from 10 to like 11:30 because, you know, in high school you had a lot of homework. And then slowly but surely, 3 to 10:30, 11 on Xbox, and then pretty soon I'm doing my homework in the morning, eating my breakfast. And then pretty soon I'm doing my homework on the bus on the way to school. And then pretty soon I'm doing my homework in other classes for classes I have later in the day. And then sometimes I just didn't do it because I was too preoccupied with playing Call of Duty. But that's kind of the way bad habits get formed. You start out small. You don't think it's a big deal. Come on. We can come from behind 1-0. If we make a mistake, it's fine. It's not a big deal. We play well enough most nights that we can make up a 1-goal deficit. We can make up a 2-goal deficit. That's fine. We'll get some power plays. We'll get some special teams in the mix. That'll even this game out for us. We'll score on our power play opportunity. We'll prevent most of theirs. Okay. So if we score on the power play and they're up 2-0, all right, the math for the game, it's 2-1. Okay. Connor, Leon, Hyman, one of those three guys will give us a goal pretty much every night of the entire season. You add those three guys' goal totals up, you're going to get more than 82. That'll tell you you're going to get at least one from those three guys on average most nights. Tonight, though, against Colorado, I am very excited to see. I watched the Colorado game on Tuesday because they were playing the Rangers. The Rangers played one of their better games in the last month because, frankly, the Rangers have been a miserable hockey team since mid-November. You know, very similarly to the way the Oilers went on that 15-6-1 run post November 23rd. The Rangers went 5-15 in a similar period of time. They have been a miserable hockey team. Their most consistent goal scorer over the last week is Sam Carrick, who, as Oiler fans know, fourth line center, does not score goals all that often. In that game, I lost my train of thought there for a second. Sorry about that. But in the game on Tuesday, the Rangers got out to a lead. They broke down. Colorado came from behind, and Colorado won in overtime because that's what good teams do. Even if they're behind, they find ways to get back in the game. And it's going to sound very simple when I say this, but if you are a good hockey team in today's NHL with the style of play that is prevalent, the types of players that are successful, if you simply make the other team play defense more than they make you play defense, even if you're behind multiple goals, you're going to have a very strong chance to pick up points. even if you're only getting a loser point, because as we talked about in that first segment, when you put players in conflict consistently, you increase the variance of a given play. Because if you get players moving and you break down their structure, then you start to create more dangerous offense. Because if you can open up their structure, if you get their defensemen to move in front of the net where they're not supposed to, and suddenly you can thread that cross seam pass. And even if you don't take a shot off of the cross seam pass, you just make a dangerous pass, which sets up another pass. You have compromised the other team's defense. You have put their goalie in a disadvantageous position, and you've opened them up now. Now, that's where you can really start to drive the net to create offense. And it's always going to be easier to skate at the net full speed with 40 to 50 feet of head start where you're coming through the neutral zone in transition. But if you need to break down the other team, which you're going to need to do at various points, when the other team plays strong, fundamentally sound defense, sometimes you are going to need to skate that puck around the perimeter of the offensive zone for 45 seconds, tire the other team out, and force them to compromise their structure in hopes of winning the puck. Otherwise, you would sit there indefinitely. You'd be in the defensive zone the entire game if the other team was unwilling to break down its structure to try and mitigate offense. But against a Colorado team that is top heavy, extremely top heavy, when you think about some of the guys who are on this team, when you win a Stanley Cup, this league is set up to penalize you for winning the Stanley Cup. Once you get past McKinnon, Rantanen, that's really it. McKinnon, Rantanen up front are really the only two forwards that really should give you pause. Like, Drouin is fine. Lehkonen is fine, but Ross Colton does not worry me. Casey Middlestat is a nice guy, but they've been playing him on the fourth line. Devontae's and Makar. Once you get past that, Josh Manson, Calvin DeHaan. I know they're missing a lot of guys on injury. We don't know the case when some guys are going to come back, if some of those guys are going to come back, but this is a good game. I'm very excited to watch Connor and Nathan MacKinnon go head to head. These are two of the three, probably the two best players in the world, because Matthews hasn't been able to stay healthy this year. But these are the two best players in the world for my money going head to head. We got Four Nations a little more than a month from now where they'll be teammates. They'll be fighting to play with Connor and Nathan MacKinnon will be fighting to play with Sidney Crosby, which I'm looking forward to seeing how the Team Canada lineup shakes out. And this is what the NHL regular season is all about. Two good teams. Who's better? Let's find out. Let's play a game. To quote Jigsaw, let's play a game. All right, that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get notifications whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys tonight after the game against the Avalanche. I will see you guys then. And until then, let's go Oilers.